Tonight, new charges are filed against a mother and her boyfriend in the death of a 2-year-old Oaklee Snow.
The allegation is that this is a trap house, a place where people use drugs. It's where people went to use drugs, and to put two kids, two very small children, in that environment was not going to produce a good outcome for anybody, which is why there's charges related to both children.
A neighbor watched from her window as a young couple stepped quietly from the house. In the man's arms was a small bundle, wrapped tightly in blankets, still, silent. The child wasn't crying. She wasn't moving. They placed her in the car and drove off. No sirens, no urgency, no explanation. What began as a custody dispute soon turned into something far more unsettling. A missing toddler, a trail of inconsistent stories, and two adults who refused to say where she'd gone. As the days passed, so did the hope of hearing good news. Behind the silence was something deeper, a pattern of behavior, overlooked warnings, and a failure by multiple systems to protect the child they were supposed to shield. The case of Oaklee Snow is not well known, but it should be. She was a toddler, not even 2 years old. Her name rarely made national headlines. Her photo didn't dominate news cycles, and yet her story exposes the very cracks that let the vulnerable slip through unnoticed. She was surrounded by people who claimed to care for her. Some did, some didn't, and others enabled what would come next. This is not just a disappearance. It is a case of misplaced trust, quiet negligence, and missed intervention. It's a case that shows how danger doesn't always shout. It sometimes hides in plain sight. Oaklee wasn't taken by a stranger. She was last seen in the care of people who should have protected her, but they didn't. And by the time authorities began asking the right questions, the answers were already buried under months of silence. Before we go any further, we want to be clear. This documentary addresses serious issues involving child endangerment and institutional failure. The details will be presented with care and respect, but the emotional weight of what happened cannot be ignored. If you're a parent, a caregiver, or someone who believes every child deserves a voice, please watch with awareness. To those joining us for the first time, welcome. If you're here because you want to better understand these cases and how to prevent them, consider subscribing and letting us know where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring these stories to light and gives a voice to those who can't speak for themselves. And to our returning viewers, thank you. Your shares, your comments, and your compassion continue to grow this community. You've helped turn this channel into a place where silence is challenged, where facts matter, and where the overlooked finally get seen. Oaklee's case may not have captured national attention when it happened, but that doesn't mean it's any less important. In fact, it may be more important because it shows us exactly what happens when warning signs are ignored, when systems fall short, and when the people closest to a child become the very reason she disappears. Now we begin our investigation, not from the start, but from the moment everything changed, from the day she was seen being carried out of that house, wrapped in silence, and never seen again. Oaklee Snow was born on March 10, 2021, in Cromwell, Oklahoma. With bright blue eyes and light blonde hair, she carried a quiet charm that stood out, even in the earliest stages of her life. Those who spent time around her described a playful, curious spirit, a toddler who watched the world carefully, always observing, always learning. She was the first child of Madison Marshall, a teenage mother still finding her footing in the adult world. At just 19 years old, Madison was navigating a new role in a setting where support could be unpredictable. Oaklee's father, Zachary Snow, was involved in the beginning, and for a time, the two shared parenting responsibilities. But that changed not long after Oaklee's birth. The relationship between the young parents began to fracture, quietly, steadily. In early 2022, Oaklee became a big sister. Madison welcomed her second child, a baby boy named Colton. While many families adapt to new additions with structure and support, this household lacked long-term stability. By the time Colton arrived, the couple had separated. Madison was now the sole caregiver of two children, responsible for their day-to-day lives and every decision that shaped their environment. Oaklee lived within a small circle. There were no outside caretakers, no daily school routines. She wasn't enrolled in daycare. Nearly every moment was spent within the confines of her home, dependent on the judgment and presence of the adults around her. In such settings, Consistency and safety are non-negotiable. The younger the child, the more trust is placed in the adults who speak on their behalf. That trust, however, is where the first cracks began to show. The decisions made about Oaklee's care were not guided by professionals or supported by community services. They were based on shifting relationships and personal choices, choices that didn't always center her well-being. Without oversight and with no formal check-ins, the responsibility for Oaklee's safety fell entirely on a few individuals. And not all of them were prepared or willing to meet that responsibility. In her brief life, Oaklee had already experienced transition and uncertainty. The details of her daily life weren't broadcast or shared widely. She wasn't visible to the world, but that doesn't make her story any less urgent. Because behind every quiet childhood is a set of decisions. And in Oaklee's case, those decisions would soon become the focus of intense scrutiny, long after anyone realized something was wrong. In October 2022, a call came into the Oaklee County Sheriff's Office in Oklahoma. Madison Marshall reported escalating concerns about her boyfriend, Roan Waters. Deputies responded that same day to the home where they were living. What they encountered wasn't just resistance. It was a situation that revealed deeper issues hiding just beneath the surface. When officers arrived, Roan came to the door. His tone was immediately defensive. He questioned their presence and demanded to know if they had legal grounds to proceed. Before the deputies could respond, the door was closed. The officers attempted to explain through the door that they were there on a safety check, but there was no cooperation, no willingness to engage. Roan's voice rose from behind the door, dismissive and confrontational. The interaction ended without further access to the home, and the officers turned to leave. But just as they were walking away, Madison returned to the property. She pulled into the driveway with her 2 children in the back seat, Oaklee and her younger brother, Colton. Officers tried to speak with her. As they approached, Roan came back outside and, this time, made communication nearly impossible. Loud music began blaring from inside the home. The officers attempted to engage Madison again, but the sound drowned out the conversation. Eventually, she indicated that everything was okay, and the deputies, unable to proceed without cooperation, left the property. That wasn't the end of the interaction. Later that day, Madison went to the home of Oaklee Snow, Oaklee's father. There, away from the noise and pressure, she gave a fuller account of the situation. She told responding officers that an incident had occurred involving Oaklee and that she had voiced concern about how things were being handled. She also said that when she confronted Roan about his behavior, the situation between them became more tense. According to officers on the scene, Madison disclosed visible evidence that something had happened. However, she declined to file a report related to her own experience. She requested to move forward only with a report concerning the treatment of her daughter. The reasons for that decision remain unclear. Whether she was fearful, uncertain, or simply trying to protect herself and her children, the result was the same: an incomplete legal picture. By November 7, 2022, a warrant was issued for Roan Waters. The charges included misconduct involving family safety. Yet despite that formal step, enforcement did not follow. He was not taken into custody. No protective supervision was enacted. The home environment remained unchanged. This was a pivotal moment. A formal complaint had been made. First-hand information had been provided. There was a warrant on record. And still, no action, no home visit, no removal, no temporary placement. The opportunity to intervene had arrived, and it passed without impact. For observers reviewing the timeline in retrospect, this point stands out. It was a clear chance to ask harder questions, to push for accountability, and to prevent risk. But the system didn't respond. And that silence, measured not just in days, but in decisions not made, would go on to define what came next. In cases like this, breakdown doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small moments, in missed conversations, in unchecked warnings, and in delays that carry consequences. The warning signs were reported, but reporting them wasn't enough. Not this time. On January 19, 2023, a call was placed to the Seminole Police Department in Oklahoma. The caller was Oaklee Snow, father of 2 young children. His voice was calm but urgent. According to Zach, his former partner, Madison Marshall, had arrived at his home earlier that day alongside her boyfriend, Roan Waters. When they left, both children, his daughter Oaklee and her younger brother Colton, were gone. Zach made it clear he had not given Madison permission to take the children. There was no legal arrangement in place authorizing their removal from his care. The departure was unexpected and unannounced. In that moment, he feared the situation was not just impulsive, but deliberate. He told officers he believed Madison had traveled to Indianapolis, Indiana. He pointed to Roan Waters' family connections in the area. Roan's mother was known to have access to rental housing in the city. Zach suspected the couple may have relocated there for shelter and distance. He had no exact address, only a likely destination based on past conversations and online activity. Despite the nature of the complaint, an Amber Alert was not issued. The system is designed to activate under specific legal criteria: a confirmed abduction, a known suspect, and clear indicators of immediate risk. In this case, law enforcement considered it a custodial disagreement. Madison, being the children's biological mother, had not violated a formal custody order on file. As a result, the request did not meet the threshold required for public notification. But for Zach, that distinction offered little comfort. He knew who Madison was involved with. He understood the previous concerns and the broader history, and he felt without hesitation that his children were not in a safe environment. In the days that followed, Zach took it upon himself to investigate. He contacted friends, searched social media, traced mutual contacts, and made repeated attempts to reach Madison. Every unanswered call, every day without a reply, added to the tension. Neither child had been seen. No updates had been posted. No confirmation of their location was provided. To the system, the case was inactive. To Zach, it was anything but. He reported every new detail to investigators. He voiced his concerns with increasing intensity. And while the law required more evidence to act, Zach continued pushing for attention. This moment marked the beginning of a larger unraveling. Not because the facts were already known, but because the silence around them began to speak for itself. If you're a parent or caregiver, think about this carefully. Would you know what to do, what to say, how to respond if your children were taken without warning and the system told you it wasn't enough? Share your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes it's not just about knowing what's wrong, it's about knowing how to be heard. The house in Indianapolis wasn't listed as an active rental. It was privately controlled by Roan Waters' mother and served as a temporary place for Madison Marshall, Roan, and the two young children, Oaklee Snow and her baby brother Colton. The neighborhood had taken notice. This house wasn't a typical family home. Neighbors referred to it as a place where people came and went without much structure. The front yard lacked upkeep, and inside the space was sparse. For some, it was a stopover. For Oaklee and Colton, it became a residence, at least for a short time. This arrangement raised questions for those who visited. Among them was Kiona Waters, Roan's sister. During a visit in early February, Kiona later told investigators she saw Oaklee and became immediately concerned. She didn't like what she observed. When she tried to bring it up, Roan responded with aggression. He told her to leave the house, and she did. But the visit stayed on her mind. She eventually reached out to the Department of Child Services to voice her concerns, and that was the right thing to do. Another visitor was Chad, a friend of Roan's. On the morning of February 9th, 2023, Chad stopped by the house. Oaklee was there. He recalled how she responded warmly when she saw him, as if happy for a moment of normalcy. But something else caught his attention. He noticed that Oaklee appeared to have makeup carefully applied around her face, particularly near her mouth and eyes. To Chad, it didn't look like playful dress-up. It looked purposeful, and he knew a small child like Oaklee wouldn't know how to apply makeup. He later told authorities that it seemed like someone was trying to change how she appeared. He also noted areas of discoloration, which left him unsettled. Chad didn't press the issue then, but it stayed with him. That same day, the situation took a sudden turn. Madison and Roan left the house. They didn't bring Colton with them. Chad received a message. Madison was asking him to take Colton temporarily. When he arrived, the baby was alone. There were no supplies, no written plan, just a quick handoff and an unclear promise that they'd return soon. They didn't. Chad alerted Roan's mother. She picked up Colton and later brought him to Kiona, who then took steps to notify Zachary Snow back in Oklahoma. Colton was now accounted for. But Oaklee wasn't, and no one who saw her at the house that week could say for sure where she had gone. What this moment revealed was less about one event and more about a pattern of quick exits, vague information, and people trying to connect the dots with limited pieces. It wasn't just one act that raised concern, it was everything surrounding it. The silence, the reactions, the decisions. There were no formal checks, no welfare visits, no legal safeguards triggered by what was seen. Those who noticed signs and shared concerns did so individually, and not always with a clear idea of what they were seeing. Without a structured system watching closely, the environment went unchecked. And that's what made it so risky. Not the location, not the condition of the home, but the lack of transparency, the decisions made behind closed doors, the voices that were too small to speak for themselves. Because some dangers don't arrive loudly. They unfold in familiar places, through quiet choices, and from people no one expected to question. February 9th, 2023. The day began quietly in the Indianapolis home, where Madison Marshall and Roan Waters had been staying. By that evening, Oaklee Snow was no longer seen by anyone outside that household. Madison began telling acquaintances that Oaklee had been involved in an accident at home. According to her, the toddler had fallen while bouncing on a toy and needed medical attention. She said they had taken her to a hospital and were handling the situation. The explanation was short, with little detail. When asked which hospital, she didn't offer a name. Later reviews of medical records across Indianapolis revealed something critical. No hospital in the area had any record of Oaklee being treated or admitted on that day, or any day surrounding it. Around the same time, a neighbor recalled seeing something that stood out. She told authorities that she saw Madison and Roan leaving the house with a bundled figure, wrapped in blankets. The shape was small and it wasn't moving. She assumed it was a sleeping child being carried to the car. But what struck her was the absence of typical signs. No baby car seat, no baby bag, and no preparation for travel. The couple left without saying a word. They didn't return. After that moment, Oaklee Snow was no longer visible to neighbors, friends, or extended family. Shortly after, the couple disappeared. Known phone numbers stopped working. Social media pages that had once offered glimpses into their lives were suddenly inactive. Messages went unanswered. Calls went to voicemail. Those closest to the family began to worry. This was not just a case of an unreachable parent. The absence of communication was paired with a missing child and a narrative that didn't hold up under even the most basic scrutiny. The claim about a hospital visit had no evidence. The departure had no notice. And no one, not family, not neighbors, not local officials, could verify Oaklee's location. At this point, there was no official alert, because there was no confirmed emergency under the criteria required to trigger one. But for those who knew Madison and those already worried about Oaklee's well-being, the concern had grown far beyond suspicion. As hours turned into days, attempts were made to locate the couple. Family members called friends, tried to trace digital footprints, and contacted anyone who might have answers. But it became clear that both Madison and Roan had cut off contact. Whatever had occurred in that house, they weren't talking about it. This was no longer just a custody issue or a communication gap. It had become something else, something defined not by what was said, but by what was withheld. In true crime investigations, silence can say as much as words. And on February 9th, 2023, the silence surrounding Oaklee's whereabouts began to grow louder. It marked a turning point in the timeline, the moment where uncertainty gave way to something more calculated, something that left the people who cared most with only questions and no answers. Fast forward to March 3rd, 2023. In Greenwood Village, Colorado, police responded to a call at a local hotel. It was a routine disturbance report until they ran the names of those involved. Among the guests was Roan Waters. Officers quickly discovered there was an outstanding warrant for him out of Oklahoma. The warrant had been active since late the previous year. Based on that record, officers placed Waters under arrest and took him into custody. Also staying at the hotel was Madison Marshall. However, at the time of the arrest, Madison had no active warrant and was not considered a suspect in any open criminal investigation. She was not detained and was allowed to leave the location. That moment shifted the direction of the case. Law enforcement in Oklahoma had been actively working to locate both Madison and Roan after Oaklee Snow was reported missing. With Roan now in custody, efforts intensified to find Madison and to clarify Oaklee's whereabouts, who by that point had not been seen for weeks. Through a combination of phone records, digital activity, and help from family members, investigators traced Madison to North Carolina. On March 23, 2023, the FBI located her at a residence near Fayetteville. She was taken into custody and transported for questioning. It was during that interview that Madison gave her statement. She described a tense morning inside the Indianapolis house. According to Madison, Oaklee had been upset, crying for food and not settling down. Roan, she said, was irritated by the noise and quickly lost patience. Madison told investigators that he picked Oaklee up and reacted physically. She said the child hit the floor and was noticeably affected afterward. Quiet, not herself. She later became unresponsive later that day. Roan refused emergency help, instead wrapping her in a blanket and placing her in their car. Madison rode in the back seat with Oaklee on her lap and later noticed she was cold to the touch and her lips were bluish. At this point, she knew her daughter had passed away. According to Madison, they drove for a long time to an abandoned house in Martinsville. Madison said Roan entered the building alone, and when he returned, Oaklee was no longer with him and said she would be next to disappear if she said anything to anyone. When asked directly about Oaklee's location, Madison told investigators that Roan had driven them to a rural area in Martinsville, Indiana. She described the site as an abandoned structure, old, unoccupied, and far from public view. She said Roan entered alone while she waited in the car, then returned shortly after. Authorities used this account to begin a focused search. With Madison's cooperation, detectives narrowed down several locations. After reviewing property records and conducting surveillance, they located a home matching her description. On April 21, 2023, officers entered an abandoned house in Martinsville. Inside, they discovered evidence consistent with what Madison had described. A concealed dresser had been used to hide Oaklee's deceased body from view. Forensic teams processed the scene and later confirmed the identification through proper verification methods. Madison's statement brought to light what many had feared. Her version of events, supported by location data and other findings, helped connect critical points in the timeline. It also closed a chapter on the unanswered questions surrounding Oaklee's disappearance.
In Seminole County, when Madison Marshall left Cromwell with her two children, ages 2 and 7 months, she is a custody mother of these children, and she had committed no crime. And this is kind of an ongoing off and on deal between her and the father. At that point, we didn't even know that she was gone. After a couple of days, Dad found out from the sister of Rome Waters, who's an ex-boyfriend of Madison, that they had departed Ofuskee County and had went to Indianapolis, Indiana. We had no information and nothing that we could issue an Amber Alert. They didn't meet the qualifications. They was with their mother. She has custody. There's no court orders, and there was no proof that they was in danger. Rome was arrested in Colorado in a motel with Madison, and there was no child. He was arrested on an outstanding warrant from Ofuskee County that was not connected to this case. And then Madison had hitched a ride back to Indianapolis, and then from there, some friends from North Carolina had bought her a bus ticket to go to North Carolina. And we just want the public to know that any information needs to be going to Indianapolis. That's where the charges would be filed at. Social media has got this, all people think that she was seen here and she wasn't. I mean, the last known when she was seen was February the 9th up there. We have taken voluntary DNA from the father just in case we need it. But even here, we don't have enough to get a search warrant to get DNA from mother or from Rome because of no crime being committed in this state. And we are in contact with Dad most days. Investigator Steve Williams talks to him almost on a daily basis.
At this stage, both Roan and Madison were now tied directly to the case, not just through behavior, but through evidence. Madison's decision to talk gave investigators the breakthrough they needed And from there, the case moved forward. This portion of the investigation marked the beginning of formal accountability. It also revealed how many layers of silence had stood between the truth and those trying to find it. For nearly 3 months, Oaklee had been missing from public view, while those who knew what happened kept it hidden. Now, with both individuals in custody, the process of seeking justice would begin. But the silence that followed Oaklee's name until that point had already left its mark on a family, on investigators, and on every person who asked where she was and why no one had answered sooner. The legal process in the case of Oaklee Snow began to take shape once both key individuals, Roan Waters and Madison Marshall, were in custody. With statements recorded, evidence secured, and the sequence of events outlined, the focus shifted from investigation to accountability. That burden now fell to the courts. Roan Waters faced the most serious charges. He was initially charged with multiple offenses, including neglect and a count tied to the outcome of Oaklee's disappearance. Prosecutors emphasized that his actions, combined with prior conduct and missed opportunities to seek help, reflected a pattern of disregard. The charges weren't based solely on one day. They spanned weeks of decisions that together revealed a breakdown in responsibility. In May 2025, Roan entered a guilty plea to neglect of a dependent, resulting in fatal consequences. In return, the most severe charge was dropped. The plea avoided a full trial, but brought the facts formally into the record. The court sentenced Waters to 45 years in the Indiana Department of Corrections. During sentencing, the judge spoke to the significance of trust, especially when it involves those too young to speak for themselves. Waters remained quiet as the sentence was handed down. His legal team called it an attempt at closure, but for Oaklee's family, accountability didn't translate to healing. Madison Marshall faced a different but equally complex legal situation. She was charged with 6 counts, including neglect and assisting in the concealment of critical information. Prosecutors made clear that her inaction and her efforts to delay the investigation played a substantial role in what unfolded. In June 2025, Madison pleaded guilty to 2 counts of neglect. She agreed to cooperate fully with authorities and testify if called to do so. The terms of her plea meant she could face up to 25 years in prison. Her attorneys described her as someone overwhelmed and intimidated, but prosecutors challenged that narrative, pointing to choices she made after the fact, choices that kept others from finding Oaklee sooner. Her final sentencing is scheduled following a full judicial review, including statements from Oaklee's relatives. While her cooperation was acknowledged, the court made clear that cooperation after the fact does not erase prior decisions. This phase of the case brought structure to what had, for months, been shrouded in silence. After a long series of unanswered questions, the courtroom finally provided some resolution, and while the law cannot undo the past, it can define where responsibility lies. Beyond the individual sentences, this case brought broader scrutiny. It sparked questions about reporting procedures, intervention thresholds, and the warning signs that too often go unheeded. In this instance, delays by both individuals and systems added up to irreversible consequences. Justice in this case came slowly, but it arrived. If you believe cases like Oaklee's must be seen, remembered, and used to push for better protections, subscribe to stay informed. What happened to her should never be reduced to headlines. It should be a turning point, a call for change, one we cannot afford to ever ignore. The system had more than one opportunity to step in, and each time it paused when it should have acted. When Madison Marshall first reached out to law enforcement in late 2022, she described a volatile situation inside the home. Officers responded, made contact, and were shown warning signs. A warrant for Roan Waters was eventually issued, but it went unserved. At the same time, Child Protective Services had already been made aware of concerns. A formal report had been submitted, yet no protective measures followed. There were no emergency removals, no immediate check-ins. Even with a documented history, the environment around Oaklee remained unchanged. Officials now confirmed that Oaklee's name had appeared in state-level records well before her disappearance. She had already been identified as a child who might be at risk. But because those reports lacked urgent, visible harm, the case didn't escalate. Each moment added to the next, and the silence between those moments allowed the situation to continue. Speaking during the legal proceedings, Chief Trial Deputy Matt Savage stated, "They were entrusted to protect this child, and they failed miserably. This wasn't a single error. It was a breakdown at multiple levels."
The allegation is that this is a trap house, a place where people use drugs. It's where people went to use drugs, and to put two kids, two very small children, in that environment was not going to produce a good outcome for anybody, which is why there's charges related to both children.
If you've ever raised a concern that wasn't taken seriously, share your experience in the comments. These conversations matter because behind every file, every report, and every delay, there's someone who's depending on the system to listen. When something feels wrong, don't wait. Say something. That single step can change everything. Situations like these rarely start with headlines. They begin quietly, in overlooked moments, in gut instincts ignored, in details dismissed as harmless. But hesitation isn't neutral, and silence, when repeated, can become complicity. Oaklee's case makes one thing clear. Not all danger is visible. It can live behind closed doors, masked by routine, explained away by familiarity. And often it's those closest to the situation who miss the signs, or who hesitate to act. Prevention doesn't start in courtrooms. It starts earlier, with awareness, access to support, and real coordination between the systems that are supposed to protect the most vulnerable. Every caregiver deserves tools to identify risk. Every community needs agencies that communicate clearly and act without delay. And the rest of us? We're not bystanders. We're part of the equation: neighbors, teachers, extended family. We all play a role in noticing when something doesn't feel right and knowing how to respond. Because what's hidden in plain sight is often the most overlooked. And the cost of waiting is measured in lives changed forever. Oaklee deserved more. She deserved a circle of protection, not unanswered questions. We owe it to her, and to every child like her, to make sure her story leads to more than just reflection.
Was
It must
allegedly
lead
by
to reform.
neighbors who claims
Thank
that
you for
her mother
watching.
was
If
carrying
Oaklee's
what
story
appeared to
stayed
be a
with you,
child wrapped in a
subscribe,
blanket,
share,
though the
and
child was
speak up.
making no
These
sound,
aren't just stories.
nor was the
They're
child
reminders of what's at stake when no one listens.